Hello, I'm Derek Manky. This is FortiGuard Live, and I'm joined today by my colleague and fellow analyst, Douglas Santos. Doug, you lead our advanced threat intelligence team. Lot to unpack every day, huh?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, welcome. And I know I get to work with you every day and on all this fun stuff. Today, for our viewers, I wanted to talk about our biannual threat landscape report. So as I said, a lot to unpack in this. This is the work of 6 months of data reflection analysis, and I know you've been on the front lines analyzing this data, right? And so let's start with some of the highlights, Doug. Ransomware, of course. This is a household name, as we know now. It's talked about. It's not going away. It's been around for as a large-scale issue for over a decade now.
Yeah.
But it seems to constantly be changing in one form or another, right? We've talked about the targeted attacks with ransomware before, and what we saw in the report, and I know you went through this data, was that we are seeing a surge still for 12 months. It's literally a relentless wave of ransomware that in terms of volume and detections. But what we call it out in the report is that we actually saw a double growth for variants in ransomware. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so we've seen a consistent growth in volume, right? For last 1.5, 2 years, just increasing number of hits in our sensors. But for the last 6 months, we actually saw increase the number of signatures, right? Which means that these cyber criminals are actually making more variants and more, which means that we have more difficulty in trying to keep up with them. So we have to release more signatures. For this last 6 months, the volume has stayed consistently with a few peaks, but the number of variants, the number of detections that we're getting on specific variants has doubled, right? So that just shows and at a very clear paints a very clear picture that there's more people incoming into these criminal affiliate networks, right? So ransomware as a service continues to grow, and it's just one of the biggest issues, right? And there's not only just one platform; it's across all platforms. We've seen ransomware targeting a lot of Windows machines, ESXIs, Linux machines, just to mention a few, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what you see in figure 11 from our report shows the ransomware volume over the last 12 months, and that's a lot of volume as it is, right? This is something it's almost identical from what we saw in our last report for the second half of 2021. But as we note, the number of variants have doubled. So you have this formula coming together where not only is it the volume, that relentless volume you still got to worry about, but also these variants. And it's a good point that the variants come with different platforms. That's why we're seeing these variants, right? Different platforms, the ransom as a service model, affiliates get, basically sign up to these campaigns, create new variants with that. And of course, defense evasion, which we'll talk about a bit later in terms of sophistication. So it literally is omnipresent, and these are the drivers behind it. Again, a good reason why you need good behavioral-based detection, because with each one of these campaigns, they have a different playbook in mind, right? Some will do phishing, some will do drive-by downloads, some will do
supply chain compromise, which seems to be trending, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so moving on from ransomware, what I'd like to talk about next is some very interesting data that we showcased in the report. And I know we were referring to this as the danger zone, and we called this out in figure 4. So first of all, not surprising, right? Log4j was still our number one detection. A bulk of that happened back in that January timeframe at the beginning of the report. It was just a behemoth, right? So that's what we did see in the report. But I think more interesting is that if we looked at we looked at two things this time, right? We looked at unpatched vulnerabilities, so this is an attack surface conversation, and what attackers are going after. Maybe you can walk us through the sort of thought process here and what that means, Doug.
Yeah, so we try to understand what are the most vulnerable devices out there in terms of which vendors and which technologies are the least unpatched, right? So when we get that data set, we try to say, okay, if we understand that these are the most unpatched services, technologies, and operating systems, so let's try to compare this data on what we're seeing on the wild in terms of IPS detections that were made to counter, to do the virtual patching of these unpatched vulnerabilities. And that basically allowed us to create what we call the danger zone, right? So it's just to showcase and to shine a light specifically on the prioritization schedule for patching and in any given environment, right? And one thing that actually got my attention to that is that the two most exploited vulnerabilities that have most unpatched devices running are from 2022, right? So, and I was looking at those specific vulnerabilities, and I think they were both from May, so it's less than 4 months, right, old. And that specific point lead us to understand and to comprehend that the cyber criminals are so much quicker in understanding that something is vulnerable and going through the process of creating a working proof of concept exploit. And on those two specific vulnerabilities itself, it's not like a log4j vulnerability, because a log4j, we have this, the source code is in the public domain. There's a lot of vulnerable devices out there, you know, and it's easy to come with a proof of concept exploit. Those two vulnerabilities that are the top in the danger zone are on closed source vulnerabilities. So that alludes to the growth of the cyber criminal affiliate networks, because they have a lot, they have more power and more knowledge, more knowledgeable people working for them. So they are able to, in less than 3-4 months, create a working exploit that can be deployed on the wild to exploit those unpatched vulnerabilities. I mean,
and dominate the attack surface outright. And it's a good point on the closed source vuln and exploit code, because what that really shows is that weaponization phase that we talk about with cyber criminals, right? That they're just becoming more agile and quick to weaponize that and then capitalize on that. The other interesting thing we saw, well, that's very true what you talked about, the most highest spread vulnerability and attacked were those 2022 CVEs. But we also saw a lot from of old ones again, right? So it is a mixed bag, right? A lot of 2014, 2015, you know, even dating back to 2013, which means we're seeing these unpatched and under active attack, right? And, you know, when it's that continuous patch management cycle that we talk about, but what's interesting about this danger zone diagram, you know, figure 4, as we call it in the report, is that this is a practical guide to look at real problems that are out there and what's being attacked, right? NIST and the MDD, they track 180,000 vulnerabilities. That's way too much for any CISO to keep them up at night, right? You know, we're calling out just handfuls here, and it's really this is a CISO guy priority conversation, right?
And CISOs need to prioritize everything, right? They need to prioritize resources. They need to prioritize their agendas. And I mean, this data that we're providing in this report, I think it's of unparalleled value to CISOs, right? Because if you have like 100 vulnerabilities and you don't understand which ones are being attacked, how do you prioritize? There's no way, right? So this is just an amazing piece of data that they can actually work with, right?
And this is a digest, right? It's a zoomed in version of that, where we also called out in the same section, just to put it into context, in terms of what we see overall of all attack vulnerabilities, it was about 15,000 out of 180,000, right? So you don't have that. That's another conversation, right? We have 180,000 total. We're actually only seeing about 15,000 really being attacked. But here are the top movers, right? So it's a really good way to break it down and approach it. So moving on from vulnerabilities, and by the way, there was also a section on, there's a lot of data in the report. There was a section on OT vulnerabilities where we actually show another zoom in just for vertical, because OT is one of the hottest, sectors being attacked right now. And the takeaway from that we saw was that it's not just about one or two or even 3 or 5 or 10 OT vendors. It's a lot. So it's a scatter chart. It's a spread. It's showing that they're all being targeted and attacked. And again, that shows more investment from cyber criminals where they're targeting and going after. I want to talk about the sophistication element, right? So what we call out in the report was wipers. This was very interesting because wipers was something that we saw maybe once a year over the course of the last decade. Very tied to nation state targeted attacks, heavily focused on usually just one organization or one target. What's interesting this year is, of course, we've seen 7 new wipers. That's a lot. So we had a blog that we released on this. We know that we've seen this new technology, this weaponized technology, essentially malware, but it was largely tied to the conflict in Ukraine. What we saw in the report, and I know you went through this data, and I think this was quite surprising, was, wait a minute, this is not just about Ukraine. We in fact saw those 7 new wipers be under quite a bit of activity in different regions. I think it was something like 24 countries, right?
Yeah, especially EMEA, right? I guess. Yeah. And the wiper is a completely different thing from any other malware that we're seeing from rats, because rats is mainly espionage. So someone trying to get a hold of your data, steal your secrets. Ransomware is about financial gain, right? But wipers is just to destroy anything that's there, right? It's like an atomic nuclear bomb, right? It just tries to cause destruction, and we see those mostly when there's a physical war going on as well, and it kind of falls into the cyber domain as well. We've seen the Shamoon malware wiper, like in 2017, 2016, if I'm not mistaken, attacking oil companies as well. And so the wipers is more tired when there is an actual conflict going on, right? And that's why we're seeing it at such a higher rate right now. That's because
and the thing is, these samples are available, right? And so when it's like that closed source, weaponization of the exploits we talked about with this, it's clearly falling into other hands because we're seeing a big spread in other countries. And that's the concerning part, I think, right? That was the surprising element to me when we look at it, is that we're seeing this in different areas. And I fully expect that to be tied at some point to cybercrime. It's just a matter of time, I think, right? For monetization as well. Another interesting thing on the sophistication is we had another update following from our last report on MITRE ATT&CK from the TTPs. What was interesting here was that the number one tactic, as we saw last time, was defense evasion, but in fact, I think it grew because it was about almost 59% of all tactic activity related to defense evasion. And in figure 10, we actually show a breakdown of all the different techniques that are related to that. And just looking at this visual, it's a lot, right? It's not just about, again, 1, 2, or 3 different techniques. That, as the MITRE ATT&CK framework grows, cyber criminals are adopting those techniques to try to evade controls, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. If you look at the amount of techniques that a malware must employ in order to carry on its malicious activity, you have always multiple layers of defense evasion, right? You have obfuscation of strings, URLs, domains. You have anti-sandboxing, anti-analysis techniques. So they stack up, right? So and that means that we need to be able to have deep visibility on all aspects of our network and our devices, right? Because this is specifically looking at EDR data set, right, and sandbox data set, which means that those are malicious activities that has slipped through traditional security products, right? So they're really advanced threats, and obviously that really advanced threats will have multiple layers of evasion, right? And it's just it's how it is.
Yeah, it's all part of that attack chain, but again, zoomed in, this high resolution intelligence that we talk about. And you're absolutely right. The good news here is that we are like this what we represent here is an actual heat map, is detection. So we're able to track and have visibility on these, which, as you said, the good news is it means we actually support these techniques. We can actually mitigate them in real time with sandboxing, real-time sandboxing, and also FortiEDR, as you said as well too. But you know, that's why it's very important to have visibility in this, because that list keeps on growing, and they're not going to stop this game, right? They're going to keep on, you know, investing into these techniques and creating new ones as well too.
Yeah, and that provides such an invaluable information, right, to cyber defenders worldwide, because at first you need to defend when security first was starting to become a real thing. You have to have all the hashes, then you have to have all the web filtering protection.
Well, first it was block the ports, IP tables, right? And
hashes
and
and then now you have the MITRE ATT&CK framework that allows you to actually run pen testing and security evaluations based on the playbooks, right? And this is why this data has so much value to cyber defenders worldwide, because even when you think about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's 14 tactics, 500, almost 500 techniques, and within each one of those techniques, there are infinite ways of implementing them. So TTP, static techniques and procedures. So there are infinite ways to at the procedure level to implement a technique. So how do you focus, right? How do you prioritize? And the report is there to help cyber defenders guide their defensive exercises.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm a big fan of this. I find this fascinating. This is an entirely different conversation. It's really exciting to have this, you know, high resolution threat intel, as we call it in the report. Something we'll continue to build on for sure, follow up on. I know you're working very closely, you know, with MITRE, as we are a research partner with MITRE and the Center for Threat Informed Defense, and that's where a lot of this good stuff is coming from as well. Not to mention the product support we have too. So, great. Well, hey, Doug, want to thank you for your time again. I know you're busy. We all are. Got to get back to being on the front lines. But really appreciate your time. This is Derek Manky again with FortiGuard Live. You can check out all of the updates on the threat report and our research series on blog.fortinet.com under threat research for all the latest updates. So again, it's Derek Manky. Joining me, as always, was Doug again. Thanks, Doug. Signing off with FortiGuard Live.